Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jake from College Football Red Zone coming in live with a brand new rendition of the First Look series where I take that holistic look at all 138 FBS programs from that 50,000 feet perspective, give you guys some thoughts on the roster, as well as give you guys some thoughts in terms of what I think this team is going to be capable of doing this fall from a record perspective. So hope you guys are excited to talk about another Big 12 program in this one, the UCF Knights, who do come in as my 60th ranked team in college football entering this season. And so if you guys are excited to talk about some UCF football, I need you guys to do a couple of things for me real fast. I need you to hit that like button as well as hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel. And guys, let's just go ahead and jump into it. It's UCF football led by Scott Frost. He has triumphantly returned back to his, I guess, from a coaching perspective, his stomping grounds. He was at Nebraska for, 2018 to 2022, being that head coach of Nebraska football, going back to his football playing alma mater. And obviously, Scott Frost, it didn't work out for him in terms of being that Nebraska head coach. Did lead UCF to the 2017 American Conference title. It led to them finishing with an undefeated season. They won a New Year's Six Bowl against Auburn. So, technically speaking, and I'm going to say this with some quotations here because I know a lot of folks are going to question the validity of this, but UCF did claim a national championship in 2017. And so, technically, Scott Frost does have a national championship in his resume. But we're here in the NIL, we're in the transfer portal era now. And I just wonder if, Scott Frost is going to be a guy that is going to thrive in this era of college football with the NIL and in the transfer portal. And, we haven't seen him lead UCF to a bowl game yet. And he struggled as the head coach of Nebraska, especially when you start to see the NIL and the transfer portal stuff really start to take place right in front of our eyes, right? So I do wonder if Scott Frost is capable of these things and capable of having the same success as he has back when he was the head coach of UCF, well before all of this stuff was starting to happen in this current era of college football. He hasn't done it yet. Not saying that he can't, but he hasn't done it yet at the end of the day, right? So that is a question right out of the gate. But really, the only other question that I have from a roster perspective is what is this pass rush going to look like? You're losing Malachi Lawrence to the NFL draft, was a top 300 prospect according to PFF going into the draft process. And while they did end up bringing in a couple of defensive linemen, Bruno Draw, who was an All-MAC player from played on the edge, you also bring in a Brad Gurley Jr. from Eastern Kentucky, an interior defensive lineman. Can both of those guys step up and provide the same level of juice that Malachi Lawrence provide off the edge as one of the better pass rushers in the Big 12 last season? So gonna need Bruno Draw to definitely take that step forward, and particularly Brad Gurley on the inside, the transfer out of Eastern Kentucky, who had some juice in the interior. He had 5.5 sacks, but going from the FCS up to Power Conference football in the Big 12, and it's the third best conference in this sport right now. Is he going to be able to hold up on his own and hold his weight instead of being a liability? That is to remain to be seen. But, I look at the rest of this roster. I do think that this roster is going to be better, at least on paper. Definitely a good number of transfers here. So you worry about, because of the fact that they're all coming from a bunch of different programs, are they going to Jesh and Mel properly so that they can take a step forward and live up to that ceiling that they have as a football team moving forward, right? I think that's something that's because I think the ceiling is relatively high here if everything falls into a place from a roster perspective and that team cohesion is 100% there. Like, for example, a quarterback. They lose Taven Jackson, started for his UCF football team for a majority of last season. He's now in North Texas, but then you got a nice little quarterback competition here at the quarterback position. Alonzo Barnett III is going to be the presumed favorite coming from James Madison, 2,800 yards, 23 touchdowns, led that James Madison football team to the college football playoff and actually had a decent performance in the college football playoff against Oregon. Helped out and getting 30 plus points on a pretty good Oregon football team. So, James Madison was feisty until the bitter end. But don't sleep on Keon Jenkins either from FIU, 1,900 yards and 14 touchdowns. He was a good football player too. And coming from FIU, helped take Willie Simmons' football team in his first year as a head coach there to a bowl game. So the quarterback situation is going to be interesting. I think Alonzo Barnett III is going to be the starter here, but I wouldn't be fully surprised if Keon Jenkins ends up being the name starter either, because I mean he can play some good ball and he can play some good quality football for you coming into this year. Meanwhile, how I'm looking at things is, hey, I think this running attack is going to look pretty good too. Landon Chambers. Watch out for Landon Chambers from Central Arkansas. Over 1,200 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns last year. Dude was a menace at the FCS level. I'm excited to see him possibly make a meaningful impact in this UCF office, especially with an improved offensive line with Cooper Tepstra, an interior offensive lineman from Michigan State. He comes over to UCF. I think that's someone that is going to be inserted into the starting lineup early on. Gonna also, whoever wins that quarterback battle as well is going to have a pretty good receiver, maybe an underrated wide receiver on the outside in Josh Derry from Monmouth. The Monmouth product had 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns last year. So Josh Derry, I know I've always talked about the transition from the FCS to the Power Conference ranks. It's not as bad if you're a skill position player, though. It's more applies to what's it going to look like in the trenches than it is from a pure skill position standpoint. And that applies to both sides of the ball here. So definitely keep an eye on Josh Derry. Linebackers, I think the linebacking core is going to be a sneaky good linebacking core. They brought in Jaleel Colbert from Old Dominion, who had 70 tackles, and then Rashad Henry, who was a bright spot in what was a horrific, just disgusting year for the UMass Minutemen, was the only FBS team in the country to not win a single game last year. Well, Rashad Henry was at least a bright spot in that. He had 67 tackles last year. Pretty nice, if you ask me. So you got two starting caliber linebackers that I think are going to play pretty well overall as individuals. And then you do also bring in a solid safety. Camille Johnson out of Wayne State could be a little bit of question mark. Doesn't even come from a Division I program, but 3 interceptions last year. I mean, one could be an accident. That could be just right place, right time. But when you get 3 interceptions in a single season, then you certainly have what's the saying? You have my curiosity, but now you have my attention, right? So, Camille Johnson, I'm definitely keeping an eye on to see if he can make an meaningful impact at UCF as well. Special teams should be improved. They brought in Will Stone, the kicker out of Texas, and then Atticus Bertram's from Wisconsin, who is a starting caliber punter. So they bring both those guys in as well. So I think, if anything else, the special teams is going to be better, which is going to aid them in some of these close games that they're planning on having. So, like I mentioned, if this team is able to mesh together, I do think the ceiling is pretty high. Now, how high of a ceiling are we talking about here, Jake? Well, that's a really good question. Let's go check that schedule now. So I actually think this, like I mentioned, I think that this is a type of schedule where I think there's a real possibility, and this is counting the bowl game as well. You're talking about like best case scenario here. You're talking about possibly winning 10 games, including a bowl game, and you're going to be ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season. That's a best case scenario here. Now, the games against Pitt on the road, I think that's going to be a tough one early on in the season. Really like Pitt's offensive firepower. Houston, is a borderline top 25 team right now, and I wouldn't be shocked if Houston is ranked by the time that we get to this when UCF plays these guys. And then BYU, they've turned really into my favorite to win the Big 12 this year after the Brandon Sorsby news too. So, yeah, but I mean, there's going to be some games in here that I just don't feel comfortable picking, even for UCF, even in a best case scenario. But, jumping to the second half of the season, though, I mean, after the BYU game, they're like all of those games are all winnable games for UCF. And so they could finish the year on a 5 game winning streak, potentially 6 games if they do end up playing in a bowl game, as I mentioned. They finish the year on a 6 game winning streak. But realistically, and I kind of talked about this, it's kind of the same principle for West Virginia when you're bringing in a high number of transfer portal guys, especially from several different programs. This is not a situation where a coordinator brought a lot of his key pieces over. It's coming from a variety of different places. These guys that are going to be expected to contribute for a football team, I just can't be super high on that kind of team. But it's one of those teams where if I'm wrong and they're much better than this 3-9 that I'm projecting, then I'm gonna be okay with that. But again, until I can see that this team has the team cohesion needed to have a successful season, just from a pure that kind of pure standpoint, like record standpoint, I can't be too high on that kind of football team. And that's also why UCF is ranked number 60 because they do bring in a lot of moving parts, right? I do think they beat Bethune-Cookman, obviously, and I think they handled Georgia State with ease as well. And even with my pessimistic take from a record perspective, I do think they at least beat Iowa State because you weren't rated like Iowa State was, and I've already talked about Iowa State in this first look series. I mean, they lost basically everybody, and they're starting from complete scratch here. So, 3-9. But I mean, I truly would not be shocked if they were playing for a bowl game here. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this UCF football team. Am I a little too high on this squad? Am I a little too low on this football team? Definitely let me know down in the comments section below what your feelings are on this UCF team going into 2026. And if you enjoyed this breakdown of UCF football going into the brand new college football season, hey, do a couple favors for me real fast. And, go ahead, hit that like button for me. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me as well. If you do happen to be brand new to the channel, this is Jake from College Football Red Zone signing off, but hoping you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.